The shuttle dropped Marcy off at the Ambassador Hotel, a sophisticated and top-tier establishment known for its flawless service. A bellboy promptly loaded her luggage onto a cart, handed her a small receipt, and greeted her warmly. The doorman tipped his hat in a courteous gesture and opened the large brass door for her, with the bellboy following her at a respectable distance. Marcy walked toward the front desk, casually scanning the area to see if Rick was there waiting for her as she had requested in her letter. She noticed a few people relaxing on the comfortable upholstered chairs and sofas spread throughout the spacious lobby, but Rick was nowhere in sight. Marcy felt a bit nervous about how their reunion would go, given that Rick had been quite upset during their phone call while she was in bed with Trey in Colombia several weeks earlier. Although Rick had likely been angry at first, especially since she had taken the liberty to end their marriage temporarily during her 6-week trip, Marcy was confident that Leslie, their neighbor, had likely filled the void in Rick's life over the past month and a half. Leslie and her husband were known swingers, and Leslie possessed an undeniable charm that attracted attention wherever she went. Marcy had often seen men in their neighborhood openly stare at Leslie as she passed. Leslie had also made it clear that she desired Rick in a physical sense. Marcy hoped that Rick had enjoyed his break from their marriage, but was certain he wouldn't want to continue anything with Leslie now that Marcy was back home. She planned to end their mutual arrangements and focus on rebuilding their relationship. Marcy suspected that rekindling their love would be tricky with Leslie still in the picture, especially given Leslie's undeniable allure. Marcy also felt guilty when she realized she hadn't actually spoken to Rick since the angry phone call while she had been in bed with Trey at the hotel in Colombia. The medical team had been extremely busy with multiple surgeries scheduled throughout the day, and although she felt sympathy for the South Americans who traveled from far and wide to receive treatment from skilled U.S. doctors, Marcy was grateful for the few days the team had to themselves for sightseeing. When she wasn't with Trey, she had managed to take photos of some of the sights, including a tour of Mount Montserrat, and texted Rick some of the better shots along with messages about their activities. Marcy was disappointed that Rick never responded to her messages. She wondered if he was still hurt by her actions. However, Marcy was certain that Rick loved her deeply. Although it might take time to heal from the wounds, she believed they would ultimately reconnect, and their marriage would grow stronger as they moved forward into the next phase of their lives as empty nesters. Marcy was determined to stay with him for life. Her brief time with another man had made her more appreciative of Rick's loyalty and strength. While Trey was a technically good lover who constantly tested her boundaries, there had been no love between them. Once their affair became public, Trey's arrogance and rudeness were no longer appealing to her. His demands in bed, especially after he knew Rick had learned of the affair, made Marcy feel humiliated. Trey pushed her to do things she never did with Rick, and the more degrading the act, the more Trey seemed to enjoy it. Trey also took pleasure in mocking Rick and their marriage, making cruel remarks that hurt Marcy even more. Trey would ask her questions like, "Who do you like better, mine or the tiny one your husband has?" Marcy, under pressure, initially gave responses she didn't fully believe, but over time, those comments became frustrating and infuriating. When she finally asked Trey to stop the verbal abuse, he only escalated it, mocking Rick and making it sound as though her husband would gladly serve Trey as a submissive. Marcy stopped complaining, hoping that Trey would ease up, but it only got worse. By the end of the trip, Marcy felt degraded and used. At the Bogota airport, as they waited for their flight, Marcy told Trey their affair was over and that she intended to focus on her marriage. Trey shrugged, indifferent, and said, "You were a damn good woman, but I was getting tired of this fling. It's probably best we part ways. Enjoy your humiliated husband." He even swapped seats with Penny so he wouldn't have to sit next to Marcy on the long flight back. Marcy couldn't understand how she had been so captivated by Trey for so long. Now she saw him for what he was, a narcissistic jerk. She was relieved that she wouldn't have to sit next to him during the flight home and instead sat next to Penny. Both women were exhausted, and their conversation was minimal during the long journey. Penny confided that Rick had called her room and revealed that he knew Penny had been cheating on her husband, Josh, with one of the doctors. Fortunately, Rick promised not to tell Josh about Penny's affair. Penny was thankful that she had avoided a major fallout and was able to enjoy the rest of her stay in Bogota. While waiting for their luggage, a young woman approached Penny and asked, Are you Penny Washington? Penny, confused, answered affirmatively. The woman handed her a large manila envelope and said, "You've been served. Have a nice day." Marcy watched in disbelief as Penny, devastated, broke down in tears. Marcy and others who had been on the trip tried to console her, offering words of comfort, but everyone knew that Penny's marriage was likely over. Penny eventually composed herself, even though she couldn't reach Josh as he had blocked her calls. Uncertain of what awaited her back home, Penny gathered her bags and took an Uber to her parents' house, which was in the same town as hers and Josh's. Meanwhile, Marcy couldn't help but glance around to see if anyone else from the trip was being served divorce papers, but after a lengthy wait for their luggage, no such encounter occurred. Marcy felt certain that Rick had calmed down from their heated phone call and would be waiting for her at the hotel soon. She eagerly anticipated reuniting with Rick, the only man she had ever truly loved. On her way to the front desk, Marcy thought about rekindling her love with Rick. She missed him more than ever and appreciated both his strengths and weaknesses, especially after her experience with Trey. Once both she and Rick had clean STD tests, she looked forward to the familiar warmth of his embrace, hoping he would still accept her. The memories of her affair with Trey made her feel degraded, as if she were a discarded object or a washed-up adult film star forced to perform distasteful acts to survive. However, she pushed these negative thoughts away, smiled, and focused on her upcoming reunion with Rick. She had secretly hoped to find Rick waiting for her in the lobby, but when she reached the front desk, there was no sign of him. A young Hispanic clerk, dressed in a fine suit, with a small gold badge identifying him as Jose Gomez, greeted her with a friendly smile. "Welcome to the Ambassador Hotel. How may I assist you?" he asked. Marcy responded, "Hi, I'm checking in. There should be a reservation under Marcy Weston." The clerk smiled and began typing on his keyboard. "I see your reservation is for one night. Is that correct?" he asked. "Yes, just one night," Marcy replied. "Your room is on the 10th floor with a city view. It's quite lovely. How many key cards will you need?" "I'm expecting my husband to join me, so I'll need 2 cards," Marcy answered. "What credit card would you like to use for your room and any additional charges?" Marcy handed the clerk her Visa card. "Here you go." "Thank you. I'll take care of this and get you to your room shortly. Your luggage is already with our bellboy, Steve. He'll be happy to assist you." "Thank you," Marcy said. "I do have a few bags, and my husband isn't here yet, so that would be great." Steve, the bellboy, stood nearby, waiting. The bellboy, ready to assist Marcy with her luggage, stood near the cart, prepared to escort her to her room. Initially, she had planned for Trey to drop her off, but given that she had ended things with him, the hotel shuttle now seemed like the much better choice. Additionally, if Rick had been waiting in the lobby, Trey's drop-off might have ruined what Marcy hoped would be a heartfelt reunion. As the clerk inserted Marcy's Visa card into the reader and retrieved a couple of blank key cards, he glanced at his screen and frowned. "I'm sorry, Miss Weston, but that card has been declined. Do you have a different one?" he asked. A sense of dread settled in Marcy's stomach. She hadn't used her credit cards in Bogota, as the Doctors Without Borders team had covered their living expenses, and Trey had taken care of any purchases while they were in town. She had only brought 2 credit cards with her, her Visa and Discover, and had left them, along with her passport, locked in the hotel safe to prevent theft. She wondered if someone had stolen her card details while she was away. "Do you accept Discover?" she asked, handing the clerk her other card, receiving her Visa back in return. "Yes, ma'am. Let me run this through," the clerk replied, preparing to finalize her check-in. By this time, another couple had arrived at the front desk and stood waiting behind Marcy, who felt a growing sense of embarrassment as the clerk again informed her that the Discover card had also been declined. When he asked if she had another card to try, Marcy felt awkward. The young couple behind her seemed to be growing impatient, waiting behind someone who couldn't even pay for her room. "These are the only 2 cards I have. I just returned from a 6-week trip abroad, so something must have gone wrong," Marcy explained. "Let me step out of line and call my husband to figure out what happened." "Very well. I hope everything works out for you. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to assist," the clerk replied. Marcy walked over to a seating area while the young couple began their check-in. The bellboy, who had been waiting with her luggage, now shifted his attention to assist the couple instead, leaving Marcy standing aside. Taking out her phone, Marcy realized she had turned it off during the flight and forgotten to turn it back on amid the commotion involving Penny at the airport. She powered the phone back on and entered her passcode, assuming she'd missed many messages from Rick and others during the flight. However, she was surprised to find no new messages. After opening the phone app, she pressed the icon next to Rick's photo on her favorite screen. She also noticed Trey's name listed there and made a mental note to remove it after talking to Rick. When she called Rick, rather than hearing a ringtone, an automated voice informed her that his number was disconnected. "What the hell?" Marcy muttered to herself, pulling the phone away from her ear in shock. Just then, a man she had noticed sitting in one of the lobby chairs earlier approached her. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you Marcy Weston?" he asked. Startled, she looked up at the man, dressed in a fine suit, with fear creeping into her eyes. "Yes, I'm Marcy. Can I help you?" she asked. "No, ma'am, but I have something your husband Rick wanted you to have," the man said, handing her a large manila envelope. As soon as she took the envelope, the man nodded and added, "Have a nice day," before heading toward the exit. Marcy trembled slightly as she held the envelope, but she relaxed when she realized the man hadn't said the dreaded words, "You've been served." Nor did he take a picture of her with the envelope. Perhaps this was a fun surprise from Rick, or maybe he wanted to meet her elsewhere. Marcy's curiosity grew, and she quickly walked to the nearest upholstered chair to open the envelope. Inside, she found a typed letter and a smaller, stiffer envelope. Taking a deep breath, she began to read. "Marcy, I'm not a coward, but as your husband, I must tell you that your flagrant disregard for our marriage and the vows we made shattered my heart. I suppose you justified your actions by thinking I had an affair with Deidre when we were in Iraq. That is not the case. I regret to admit that one day, after we returned to base following an ambush by insurgents, Deidre and I shared a moment of overwhelming emotion. We embraced, kissed passionately, but there was no full intimacy. It was a lapse in judgment after a traumatic experience. Unlike your planned affairs, this was a mistake, one I wish I could undo. You are the only woman I've had intercourse with since we married, more than 20 years ago. I know you cannot say the same. In addition to Trey, I found out about your affair during my time in Korea. I hired a private investigator who learned of your meetings at the Red Roof Inn. Although they couldn't identify your lover, we both know you cheated. For some reason, I gave you a pass on this Red Roof affair, as I was away, and you didn't flaunt it. I learned that you ended it once I returned home. From your letter, I understand you've made changes to our marriage, allowing one spouse to act without consulting the other. Well, I never took Leslie up on your offer, as the thought of her being gifted to me repulsed me. However, I did invite her and her husband over for dinner while you were away. She later told me that she was upset with you for not discussing your activities with me first. She and her husband didn't approve of your actions, and neither do I. During your time in Colombia with Trey, I took measures to protect myself. I paid off and canceled all our joint credit cards, ensuring no one took advantage of you. I also changed my life insurance beneficiaries to the kids and used the power of attorney you signed years ago to sell our house and cars. The buyers, Rod and Emily Wellman, are thrilled with the house. As for the car sales, I simply compared prices and sold them. I also canceled my phone on our family plan, got a new one, and removed myself from our joint accounts. I've decided not to divorce you, though you are free to do so on the grounds of abandonment, as I will be on the road for at least a year. I have no plans to remarry and have already received everything I needed from our marriage. I'll be traveling the country in an RV for the next year or more. By the way, I sent some incriminating photos and recordings from Colombia to our family, friends, and co-workers. They now know the truth, and I've included you in the emails. Lastly, I've included a $500 Visa gift card in the smaller envelope. It's a gesture, although I know it won't make up for what's happened. This is likely the last time you'll hear from me. I hope you understand my position. Goodbye, Rick. Marcy sat in silence for a moment, overwhelmed by the letter's contents.